Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be focusing on the economic file here in Egypt, taking a look on the economic reform program. This is in light of the recent cabinet reshuffle that took place last week with new 9 ministers and the merging of the investment and international cooperation ministries. And we're also going to be talking about the value of the Egyptian pound against the dollar, which has risen over the past couple of weeks. And joining us here in the studio to shed more light on this issue is Dr. Khaled Nagaty, the Vice President of the World Small and Medium Enterprises Association. Dr. Khaled, thank you very much for joining us.
It's always a pleasure.
First off, ladies and gentlemen, before we start off our discussion regarding the economic file, the Jordanian King Abdullah II visited Egypt today, met with President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and we're joined over the phone to shed more light on the summit by Dr. Sarah Kira, the political analyst. Dr. Kira, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Dr. Kira, first of all, what is the significance of such a summit, King Abdullah II meeting President al-Sisi? They talked about many topics, many issues concerning the world, concerning the Middle East, and a lot of the crises there. What is the main significance of this visit now?
Well, first to start with, the time has very high importance since we're facing UN resolutions regarding Palestine, talks about Syria, logistic aid from Egypt to Libya, and this is all discussed by His Majesty, the King of Jordan today, and President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. This comes in very important time because it's the time we can achieve something for the Middle East and for the Med Coast and the chaos caused since 2011. It comes directly after the meeting of King Abdullah with the U.S. President Trump. And of course, to end the crisis, and there's no better than Egypt and Jordan to take the lead for this now. Egypt's role is known, and its ideology towards Arab countries is known, and it has very important stances either for Palestine or Syria and Libya as well. Counterterrorism is one of the very significant topics, I think, that have been discussed today. And Jordan as well has a very clear stance regarding that.
Well, Dr. Kira, you've mentioned that this meeting comes on the back of a meeting between Jordan's King Abdullah II with the U.S. President Donald Trump. Does this really give any signals regarding Trump's and the U.S. administration's strategy and policies regarding the Middle East crisis, on top of which is the Palestinian-Israeli file?
Well, I don't think the new U.S. administration has a clear stance yet. Maybe the president, as a person, has a clear stance towards ending terrorism and having safety zones in Syria. But the U.S. administration and what the United States is facing today doesn't give us a very clear stance on what's going to be happening on the ground. But regarding Trump himself, President Trump himself, it's been clear during his campaign and his debate that he wants to do something about that. So let's just wait and see. But I think the major countries in the Middle East and the safest, either Egypt or Jordan, are taking huge steps towards that. And yes, it's time.
Dr. Sarah Kira, the political analyst, thank you very much for joining us. And we'll definitely be going to be following up on the latest repercussions from this summit. But before we start our discussion, let's check out this report regarding the devaluation of the American dollar against the Egyptian pound, and we'll be right back.
The Egyptian pound strengthened against the US dollar, regaining ground after record lows, which followed the central bank's decision to float the currency in November. After plunging to 8.83 pounds against the dollar before the flotation to almost 20 in December, the pound has strengthened since last week to reach less than 16 against the dollar. Faced with plummeting foreign currency reserves since its 2011 revolution, the central bank floated the pound and the government cut fuel subsidies, moves which helped secure a $12 billion loan from the IMF. International investors reacting favorably to the flotation have since shown strong interest in government bonds and treasury bills. The inflows, as well as the IMF loan's first tranche worth $2.75 billion, have made dollars more available. Meanwhile, Egypt's unemployment rate eased slightly in the fourth quarter of 2016 to 12.4% from 12.6%. The unemployment rate also declined from 12.8% recorded in the same period of 2018. According to a statement by the Central Agency for Public Mobilization and Statistics, CAPMAS, the number of unemployed persons stood at 3.59 million, decreasing 49,000 people from the previous quarter. The labor force stood at 25.5 million persons, increasing by 299,000 from the previous quarter. CAPMAS reported that 8.5% of the male labor force is unemployed, decreasing from 8.7% during the previous quarter. Unemployment rates amongst female labor force, however, inched to 25.3% as opposed to 25.9% during the same period last year.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Without further ado, starting off our discussion, Dr. Nagaty. Now, over the past couple of weeks, we saw the devaluation of the American dollar against the Egyptian pound. Now, this is something a lot of people were happy about. Nobody knows exactly how long the Egyptian pound will rise against the dollar. A lot of people are concerned. They're saying, well, maybe that's a devaluation for the time being, but then again, it will go up again against the Egyptian pound. And everyone's been talking about the real value of the Egyptian pound that we're supposed to reach by the end of the year at most. How do you see the process of the value of the Egyptian pound against the dollar? Does it make sense? Is it logical? What should we expect in the future?
First of all, I would like to highlight just one issue. There is no such a thing as the expression. Most of the people say something like the US dollars have been increased or decreased against the Egyptian pounds. It's actually never happens this way. It's the Egyptian pounds will always rise or decrease, fall against all foreign currencies, not only the US dollars.
Yes.
So basically, when we say the US dollars now is 16 pounds or so, more or less, my personal view, that was expected. I was personally expecting this. I said this many times on my wall, on my Facebook page. A lot of people were saying that it will be increased up to 25 and 30 pounds, which was imaginary. There's no way it could reach this way. I believe, my personal opinion, it will range from 15 to 16 Egyptian pounds, and will be stabilized around this figure before the end of the year. And that's what the way I see it.
Would you say that this would be the real value of the Egyptian pound against the dollar?
Yes.
So it would, no way it would reach the previous levels of £8.
No, I don't think this will ever happen, because also there's so many factors. It depends on the, you know what, if it's all about principle of demand. How much demand the market is asking for US dollars, for the currency. It's a principle economic, it's a simple economic principle. The more demand, the higher the price will be. So basically, if the tourist starts to get back on track, this will pump so much US dollars again in the Egyptian economy. Basically, it will the Egyptian pound will be increased against the US dollars.
Yes.
So many factors, like for example, also the export. We have so many factors are closed or even working 20% capacity. So basically, if the government could help these companies or factors or whatever, these factories will be able to pump foreign currency, because they will export. The next day they will bring US dollars and foreign currency, not only US dollars, but many foreign currencies. So it depends on so many factors. But however, the way I see it, if the current situation remains the same till the end of the year, I believe the average normal rate should be between 15 to 16. It might, although it might go a little bit up around Ramadan, because of course the demand will be so much for the US dollars. However, I just wrote an article about 3 weeks ago in the press. The floating has educated the Egyptian people to change their behavior towards buying unnecessary supplies. So basically, even though during Ramadan, I don't think it will be the price will be increased as last year.
Because people would be more cautious and conscious about their spending habits.
Yes, Egyptian people now started to buy the Egyptian product. It doesn't matter how much the price is; it's still much below the imported product. Most of it are the same quality or even close to the foreign quality, international quality. So these just learn how to change their habits towards buying their day-to-day supplies.
Yes.
So,
well, Dr. Nagaty, now last week the Central Bank of Egypt stated that their foreign reserves as of the end of January increased as opposed to the end of December of last year, 2016. Now the foreign reserves are around a little bit over $26 billion.
Yes.
Do you feel that this about £2 billion, $2 billion increase within the foreign reserves, does that really have any sort of effect on the value of the Egyptian pound against the dollar, or is this irrelevant totally?
Two factors here. Number one, I don't like to believe that this is realistic increase at the Federal Reserve, at the reserve in Egypt. Because when you're saying that it has been increased because of facilities, you got credit facilities you got from other companies of other countries or from international institutions like IMF or whatever, that doesn't mean that you can count on this as a reserve, because this is a facility that you have to return with interest. Realistic facility, realistic reserve should be coming out of export, tourism, and so on. I just have to say one thing, that it's time for the Egyptian government to stop being so proud of their ability to borrow money from international institutions. And it is time to start to try to be proud by their ability to reform the the Egyptian economic, or restructuring the Egyptian economic. Borrowing is not, it could be temporarily solution.
Yes, but it's not a long-term one.
And you cannot count on this money as a reserve, as the foreign currency reserve.
Yes. Dr. Nagaty, now you've mentioned something that is very important, which is the imports to exports ratio. Now, we've been hearing for many years now that we export much more than we import much more than actually exporting. We are importing almost 80% of our commodities. Now, in order to balance this out, or at least try to increase our exports, we need to have higher domestic productivity here. Now, with the increase of, with the decrease of the value of the Egyptian pound against the dollar, now this has proved to be very hard for a lot of industries, a lot of factories. As you've mentioned, a lot of factories now and industries are working at 20% capacity.
Yes.
Now, what can be done to actually increase the domestic production, to increase our competitiveness, increase the quality and the quantity of our Egyptian production?
We have so many factors here. Number one is, let's look at the cup half full, not half empty. The decrease of the Egyptian pound against foreign currency, it could be a positive. It has some kind of a positive side, which is your rates will be less expensive for export and for tourism and so on. Basically, if the tourist would used to spend 2 years ago $100 for one night, he could spend $100 for 3 nights now in Egypt. So basically, you have to look at you have to use the marketeer sense.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be a negative point. It could be a positive point if you know how to market it internationally. You can use it in tourism. You can use it in exporting, because the companies outside would like to manufacture in Egypt because of the low price. So we always look at the negative point of everything in Egypt. However, one main factor we should count on is SMEs. How we have something called feeding industries. Feeding industries are very important for first of all to reduce the unemployment rate. Number two is very important for exporting. How? For example, are we not able to manufacture small car pieces like the textiles for the what do you call it, for the car seats and so on? Why do we have to import such a thing from China, for example? We have so many feeding industries that can help the large corporations in exporting, using these feeding industries to export and make a lot of money in US dollars. India, for example, they have the Indian government has excluded 13 basic commodity to be produced only by SMEs. It is prohibited to be produced or manufactured by large corporates. Why? To give the chance and the opportunity to SMEs to work without competition, and connect their productions, the final product, to the large companies as feeding industries. So basically, they have now more than 30 million SMEs, registered SMEs.
Yes.
The problem is most of the SMEs in Egypt, not the SMEs, but micro, of the Central Bank of Egypt, small and medium enterprises are the companies are making total revenue from 10 million up to 100 million Egyptian pounds.
Yes.
That's the new definition that all banks are working with now, according to the CBE. So basically, the very small companies and the micro, according to the definition, are the one who make less than 10 million Egyptian pounds. Those are the ones who, if you give them a little push, they can reduce the unemployment rate. They can be used for feeding industries and so on. So they have to focus on SMEs as well.
Yes. Well, Doctor, do you feel that it is the duty of the Central Bank of Egypt to actually encourage the SMEs and the micro enterprises as well? Is it up to the Central Bank of Egypt? Is it up to the banking system in Egypt to actually be more courageous and take bigger risks on giving young investors their sum of money that they need to start off this production process?
It is totally up to the CBE, the Central Bank of Egypt, because before the last definition, December 2015, there was no SMEs definition. So basically, each bank and financial institution would define the SMEs according to their own inclination and to their own policy, internal policy. December 2015, CBE came up with the definition. If we like it or not, we have a definition now. So it is, yes, up to the central bank. I can tell you the initiative that the President El-Sisi has announced a few months ago, about 200 billion Egyptian pounds for SMEs over 4 years, which is 50 per year, to finance SMEs. That was a great decision, a great initiative. However, the point is not, I don't want to know how much is offered for SMEs. What I want to know, how many SMEs were able to use this fund.
Yes.
Okay. The problem is not on the fund. The problem is for the process for SMEs to obtain this fund. It's like if I give you an apple and I put it in a glass box and tell you this is for you, but you can't reach it. So basically the apple will remain the same. So the problem is not the initiative. The initiative was a great start. However, President Sisi cannot do everything on his own. It has to be an executive process by which SMEs can obtain this fund, can have access to finance. I always have a say that finance is not a right for SMEs. However, it is a privilege by which you have to have some required documents. If you have it, you can have this privilege. So they have to educate SMEs, but it of course comes from the CBE at the end.
So if the CBE is actually providing 200 billion Egyptian pounds for SMEs and everything is in place for these SMEs to actually flourish and the productivity should increase, but you're still saying that a lot of the factories and industries are only working at 20% capacity. Now, is this only down to not not being able to obtain their share of this sum of money from the CBE?
When any company goes or any factory go to any financial institution to get finance, to have access to finance, first thing the bank, of course, as a financial institution, they would like to see some positive figures. You can't tell me I have debts over the last 5 years and you have to give me 20 million Egyptian pounds. Banks will not do that. So basically, I was hoping that the initiative of President El-Sisi could be divided, 30% out of it, which is out of the 50 billion every year, to go towards the floating, the factoring that have defaulting. Default definition is very wide. It could be ranging from defaulting in credit facilities with financial institutions. It could be defaulting with you cannot pay your salaries. It could be defaulting with electricity and governmental entities and so on. So 30% out of the 50 billion should be used for floating these factories. I can guarantee you a lot of factories in Egypt, if they get only like 5 million Egyptian pounds, they will rise and work like no tomorrow. They just need some oxygen. Yes. That's all they work full capacity in about 2 months.
So you would say that a big part of the problem is the bureaucratic process of actually reaching these financial assets?
It's not the bureaucratic process. It's basically the president has put the initiative. Someone has to think to tell him, really, these factories, they should get help. You can't leave it to banks. Banks will never finance defaulting factories. It will never happen.
But who should do that? The Ministry of Investment?
No, Ministry of Trade. The only problem is that we had no godfather in Egypt. So basically, also President Sisi has announced last year of the reform of the special entity for SMEs, governmental institution. It's under the umbrella of the Ministry of Trade. Hopefully, this new organization, when it is formed officially, it will be the godfather for SMEs, so they can take this decision.
Yes.
I was reading the news, something very weird. The governmental reports say the defaulting factories are 134 factories in Egypt that are not working full capacity. If you go to any business unions or investment unions, each one of them, they give you a list of 200 factories at least. So basically, it's a big range of numbers. So it should be divided. The initiative of President Sisi should be divided, 30% out of it at least, to float the factories that they have financial problems.
Yes. Well, with the establishment of a new organization such as that, do we still suffer from the infamous corruption that a lot of our institutions are suffering from, or a lot of our organizations suffering from? Now starting a new organization, do we start off on a clean slate, or do we still carry on this baggage with us?
No, it has to be no, you can't carry the old package. You can't carry the old package. It has to be a brand new organization, brand new strategy, brand new laws, brand new policy, brand new process, everything. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have a lot of international practice that we can absorb what we like, and we can promote it in Egypt as well.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, also in light of the recent economic status that Egypt is witnessing, the IMF sees that the Egyptian inflation should ease when the reform program impact wears off. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
The International Monetary Fund, IMF, said it expects Egypt's inflation, which jumped to almost 30% in January, ease once the impact of measures, including the floating of the currency, wears off. Chris Jarvis, IMF Mission Chief for Egypt, said the IMF expected inflation to go up, as it did for several months after the launch of the reform program, adding that once these effects wear off and so long as budget and monetary policies remain tight. IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde said on Monday Egypt is making good progress in its economic reform program, and the recent developments might be an indicator that the transition is coming to a close. Lagarde expressed her confidence that authorities are doing the best they can under the circumstances, saying that they're seeing good progress and ownership taken of the reforms by the authorities. She added it is difficult to be certain whether the transition will be complete any time in 2017, but she expressed her optimism. Meanwhile, the Finance Minister Amr Garhi said he expects inflation to peak by the end of the first quarter. The IMF, in a staff report prepared before the loans accord approval, expects the annual rate to drop to 16.6% by the end of June. Prices have surged since Egypt reduced fuel subsidies and removed exchange rate restrictions in November, steps that were key to secure a $12 billion IMF loan agreement. The pound has since lost about half of its value, and inflation in urban areas has accelerated at an annual rate of 28% in January. The central bank raised interest rates by 300 basis points in November to 14.75% for the benchmark overnight deposit rate. 5 out of 7 economists in a survey expect policymakers to keep the rate unchanged when the Monetary Policy Committee meets on Thursday.
Welcome back, and gentlemen. Dr. Nagaty, as you've mentioned now, it is a very simple supply and demand equation which really dictates how the value of the Egyptian pound against the dollar will be, and dictates exactly how the prices of the commodities would go down or not. Now, everyone expected that with the rise of the Egyptian pound, the recent rise of the Egyptian pound against the dollar, prices would go down. Now, some commodities actually witnessed some decrease in the prices, but not most. Now, can you explain when such prices would actually go down or not? Because we have a saying in Egypt that whatever goes up doesn't come down.
In Egypt, yes, whatever goes up doesn't come down. But it has some kind of true side out of it. Why? Because the economic principle, supply and demand, is the most basic principle you can count on in these cases. However, you can't ask the importer who imported their product with for $1 for 20 Egyptian pounds 2 months ago, and priced his product based on his cost. Now, because the US dollar is 15 or 16 or whatever, you can ask him to reduce the price. Who's gonna carry out the difference in here? So basically, the people in Egypt have to understand, Egyptian people have to understand some basic economic principles. That yes, some commodities the prices will come down. However, some come sooner than the others. Long-term commodities, it will take time until the price comes down, because they have stock, they bought it with certain price. Till the end of the year, the price of the Egyptian pounds will still have some turbulence, up or down. It will not be stable before the end of 2017. That's my opinion. However, no price in Egypt for any commodity will be able to be determined how much exactly it is until before the end of this year. Yes.
Well, do you feel that in light of the recent inflation over the past few months, do you feel that this was an Egyptian consumer to be well educated about his spending habits now? Do you expect that seriously during Ramadan people will actually reconsider their spending habits and during the feast?
Let's hope so. I hope so. I do hope so. Last year it was a major problem. This year I don't think it will be the same problem. Egyptian people are very smart. They have sense when to stop buying unnecessary supplies. Look at now, the sugar problem is almost you can almost find sugar in any supermarket now. I can find it in most suppliers. Basically, I believe yes, the recent economic events, has educated the Egyptian people to change their habits, their economic habits.
Yes. Dr. Nagaty, now the former investment minister, Dalia Khurshid, actually said that the most recent priority was to complete the investment law, which has been really very hard to actually, and a big reason why a lot of foreign investors don't really come to the Egyptian market. They always complain about the bureaucratic obstacles and challenges, about entering the market, not knowing exactly how they would get out of the market if they wish. And you've also mentioned now that a lot of SMEs and micro enterprises here in Egypt domestically still have a problem actually finalizing or obtaining, trying to get assets, trying to get financial support, trying to get liquidity, and pay their own wages. Do you feel that we have a problem still with the investment law attracting foreign investors and also encouraging domestic investors to start their own businesses?
Absolutely, and not only the foreign investors, the local investors. If I'm a local investor, there's no way I can invest a lot of money in Egypt when I know that I cannot, if I have a sister company abroad, because some of the companies in Egypt, they are owned by foreign companies abroad. I don't have the freedom to take my money out or bring it in whenever I want. The exit scenario is a basic principle to be attracting foreign investors. Foreign investors will always look for an exit scenario. If they have a problem in this country, they have to make sure that if they face economic problem, shut down the company here, let's move our money somewhere else. They have to have this freedom. If they don't have it, that's a big issue for them. And I don't see why for the last 3 years we cannot issue the new investment law. You cannot attract investors without a bankruptcy, for example, bankruptcy law. In the U.S., I lived there for a long time. You have Chapter 7, Chapter 9, and Chapter 11 bankruptcies. You have 3 chapters for bankruptcies. 3 ways to get out of, to bankrupt your company, or so many ways to transfer your money anywhere else. No restrictions. In Egypt, yes, we could have some restrictions because of our economic situation. However, I don't see any reason not to issue the investment law as soon as possible. We have a parliament. We have a president who can take decisions immediately, and this is a big plus for the Egyptian economy. We've seen it many times before. So basically, I don't see any. I believe joining the 2 ministers, I believe Minister Sahar Nasr, and I know her personally, she's very active. And I believe she will work hard on this.
Yes. Well, it has been a problem, this investment law, for a few years now, as you've mentioned. Why have we been unable to solve it? And why, if we're having problems with the investment law, why is it still very hard to encourage the local investor? I mean, still, it must be a little bit easier for a local investor to start their own business than actually getting a foreign investor to come and invest in the Egyptian market.
Any investor, either local or international or foreign investor, first thing, they look for security. Over the last 5 years, we had security issues in Egypt. So basically, who's going to invest millions or billions in factories and so on? And the next day, you can have some people shutting down your factory and ripping off your products and so on. So this is not encouraging for any local, or let alone international investors. So basically, there were priorities for the last 5 years in Egypt. The restructure of the Egyptian society and the Egyptian economy, the 2 or 3 governments has been following each other. They had priorities. Number 1 was security, I believe so. There's no investment without security. Security issue has been almost solved, which is, we can sense that. Now you can look for investment law and for what can really attract investors, either local and international. However, you cannot equalize both of them. You have to make a special process for the local investor, and you have to identify some target projects for local investors, giving the fact that they have the citizenship factor, that they can pump some money in some infrastructure project that the international one would not be interested in. Ministry of Investment, I believe under Minister Sahar Nasr, I think it will be improved. I believe now the security issue has been solved, so we have no reason whatsoever not to attract investors anymore.
Yes. Well, we've seen a lot of presidential visits and a lot of governmental visits and governmental agreements with major superpowers such as China. We've seen a lot of memorandums of understanding being signed with main European countries. We witness a lot of high-level business delegations coming to Egypt every once in a while. Do they materialize in actual investments? Do they materialize in actual fulfilling the potential of these visits and these agreements, or are they basically materializing in terms of government-to-government business and trade?
I believe that President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi should have an assistant to follow up on the investment opportunities that has been discussed. A lot of investment opportunities have been discussed during the economic summit that was done 2 years ago. However, no one can hear anything about it anymore. Why? Because no one is following up. The guy is doing so many things. I really raise my hat to him. However, he has to have arms. He has to have people to follow up. He can't do everything on his own. He did the summit. He brought a lot of investment opportunities from all over the world. We've all seen it. We cannot just live on borrowing from the Gulf, GCC and from any international financial institutions. Egypt is much bigger than this. Egypt is much stronger than this. Enough borrowing. We have to restructure our company. The executive process is the issue in Egypt, not the presidential decisions. So this has to be solved.
Well, one last question, because we're running out of time. Now, we've seen a lot of activities by the government and a lot of efforts exerted within the energy sector, a lot of electricity plants being built, a lot of work in the transportation sector. But also, and these things should be facilitating and making it easier for the local investor to produce more and to compete more. But at the same time, we're going to be witnessing there will be still a little bit certain level of inflation within all the raw materials and all the expenses in to start off the business or continue the process of producing. And also subsidies will still be lifted on gasoline and petroleum products. Now, do you feel that with both things at the same time, do you feel that they're balancing each other out and we still have, it will be easier for us to produce more and export more? Or do they cancel each other out and we're still going to be in the same place? Or maybe the development won't be as fast as we would hope for?
If we need the development to be as fast as we hope for, we have to make sure that the raw materials could be produced in Egypt. Our major problem is we import 80% of our raw materials. And this costs us foreign currency. If the foreign currency is expensive, then the raw materials are expensive. Look at the medicines. 85% of the raw materials are imported. How could they produce the medications in Egypt if the raw materials is not available? So basically, we have to focus on producing the raw materials.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, definitely there are many developments taking place within the economic file here in Egypt, and we're going to be following up here on Nile International. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank our very distinguished guest, Dr. Khaled Nagaty, the Vice President of the World SME. Dr. Nagaty, thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.